Quick question before we get into this one. If a reservation appeared in your name for a campsite that officially doesn't exist, would you cancel it or find out where it was? Subscribe and tell me your answer below. At 4 minutes past 3 on a Tuesday morning, our reservation system checked a man into Site 14 at Rell Creek State Park. I know that site doesn't exist because I'm the one who took it out of the books 9 years ago. It has no pad number, no fee code, no water line. The gate printed him a permit anyway. He was down there that night, on ground nobody has inspected since before my nephew was born. And I'm the person who signs the occupancy report the state gets. I found it at 7:20 the next morning, before the coffee had even finished, because the daily variance report flagged a stay with no revenue attached to it. That's my whole job in one sentence. I'm the Reservations and Revenue Coordinator for the Northeast District of the Alabama State Parks Division, which means I sit in an office in Gunnersville and make the money agree with the beds. When a camper pays $62 for 2 nights, that money has to land in the right park, under the right site class, on the right date, or somebody at the end of the fiscal year is going to ask me why. Site 14 had a stay on it. It had a name on it, couild, and a vehicle tag, and a party size of 1. It had no dollars because there was no fee code to attach dollars to. That's the only reason I saw it. If somebody had thought to give the ghost a price, I might have gone the whole summer without noticing. I want to explain what I did next, because I've had to explain it a number of times since. And every single time, it sounds smaller than it felt. First, I assumed it was me. That's not humility, it's experience. We'd cut over to a new statewide reservation platform in March, a vendor product out of Virginia, and the whole spring had been a slow-motion argument with the database. I'd built test bookings myself in April to check the fee tables, so I searched my own test records. Nothing at Rell Creek. Then I checked the vendor's training environment, because twice that spring, somebody's practice booking had leaked into live data and shown up on a real roster. The training environment didn't have Rell Creek loaded at all. Then I looked at the site inventory table, which is the list of every campsite the state believes it owns. Rell Creek, Hollow Loop, sites 1 through 13, 15 through 26. And there, between them, sitting quiet as a stone, Site 14, status active, site class primitive, no hookups, nightly rate blank. I sat back and I remember thinking, well, that's a data problem, and data problems are mine, and I can have this closed by lunch. The last ordinary explanation I had was a person. Gate attendants can override things. If a family shows up at 7 at night with a confirmation for a site that's flooded, the attendant can hand key them somewhere else. And if the attendant is 19 and tired and typing a number off a paper roster, a 14 instead of a 4 is the easiest mistake in the world. So I pulled the audit trail, which records who touched a record and when. The record wasn't created by a person. Under user, it said, system, time of creation, 3:04 a.m. I called the park. Jory Mabry answered the gate line on the second ring, which tells you something about her, because most seasonals let it go to the message. She's 19, she's saving for Sneed State, and she treats that gatehouse like a job that might promote her. Hollow Loop, 14, I said. Did somebody check in on that last night? Yeah. A pause, and the sound of paper. 16, 17, 14. He came through around 6. He was on the arrival list. He was on your list. He printed off the terminal, ma'am. I don't type the list, it just comes up. I asked her if she'd walked the loop. She said she wasn't supposed to leave the gate before 9, and that the loop was the host's business. I asked her if she knew where Site 14 was. There was a longer pause on that one. "I know where 12 is," she said. "And there's a gap, kind of. And then the road bends and there's 15. I figured they skipped the number. Some parks skip 13. I told her I'd call her back. Then I called the campground host's cell, which is a number in our directory attached to a volunteer named Odell Rook. It rang 11 times and did not go anywhere. Here is the part where I could have written a note and gone on with my morning. Software error, no revenue impact, referred to vendor, closed. I've written 100 of those. What stopped me was the shape of it. A record had been created for a site that has no rate. On a night with no staff action at 4 minutes past 3 in the morning, and the state system had then printed a piece of paper telling a real human being to go sleep in a specific place. And I had already certified June's occupancy for that park. My electronic signature is on it. Not the superintendent's, mine. So I told my supervisor I was doing a site class audit at Rell Creek, and I drove out there after work. It's about 40 minutes from my office, east and then north, the last 8 miles on a county road that runs along the water, with pines crowding both shoulders. I got there a little before 9, when the light was gone off the lake, but not out of the sky. Jory was still in the gatehouse. She waved me through and then leaned out and said, "He's not in 14 anymore," which is a strange sentence to receive from a teenager. Hollow Loop is the old part of the campground, up above the improved sites, a gravel one-way that hooks back on itself under hardwoods. The pads down low have electric pedestals and level gravel and the kind of picnic tables we buy by the pallet. Up top, where the road bends, it gets older. 12 was empty. Then there was the gap Jory had described. A mowed opening set back maybe 30 feet from the road with a gravel apron in front of it. It wasn't overgrown. That's the first thing I noticed, and the thing I keep coming back to. 9 years is long enough for a primitive pad in North Alabama to disappear entirely. Sweet gum comes up through the gravel, blackberry takes the edges, the ring fills with leaf litter and rots. This pad had been mowed inside of 2 weeks. The fire ring was clean, and there was gray ash in it, and a scorched can. There was a picnic table, an old wooden one, the kind we stopped buying in the 90s, with the paint gone to bare wood along the top rail. At the front of the pad, where the number post should be, there was a post, 4x4, weathered, sunk plumb and solid. It had 2 bolt holes in it at eye level and nothing on it. I found the number plate face down in the grass about a yard away, a hand-sized aluminum rectangle. I turned it over with my shoe. Brown background, white numerals, 1 and 4. "You'd be from the district." He'd come up the road behind me without much noise for a man who moves the way he moves. Odell Rook is 71, built like a length of rebar, and he was carrying a flashlight he hadn't turned on. His RV sits on the host pad at the bottom of the loop with a little wooden sign out front that says, "Welcome" in rounded letters. "Dana Truitt," I said. "Reservations." "I know what you are." He looked at the pad, not at me. "He's in 7 now. Fella from Fort Payne. He was set up here about an hour, and I got him moved before dark. And he wasn't happy about it. And I gave him tomorrow night free out of the host fund, which I'll be needing a receipt for." "You moved him because the site's closed." "I moved him because he was in it." Odell finally turned his head. There was something in his shirt pocket, a folded card, stiff enough to hold its shape, and he pressed it flat with 2 fingers, the way you'd settle a spooked animal. "Truitt. You the one that took it off the list back when?" I said I was. "Well," he said, "it's back on." He started down the road, and about 10 feet along he stopped without turning around. "He's in 7, he said. "Don't put him back." I called the vendor at 8 the next morning and got a support engineer named, well, I'm not going to use his name, because he was decent to me and it cost him nothing to be. He pulled the record while we talked. I could hear him typing. "That didn't come from us," he said. "It says system." "Right, but system is a bucket. It means no human session. Batch jobs write as system. Integrations write as system. Anything automated." More typing. "Your 304 job is the overnight reconciliation. That's the one that pulls master inventory down to the park level and then closes out the prior operating day." Closes out. Locks occupancy, posts revenue, remits. Runs at 3 every morning, every park in the state. Takes about 40 minutes. He said it the way you'd describe a thermostat. "But that job doesn't create reservations. It can't. It's got no booking permissions." "Then where did the reservation come from?" "From your side. It's sourced local." He read me a string of characters that meant nothing to me, and then translated. Origin is the park's own inventory table. Somebody or something at Rel Creek has an active, bookable site with no rate on it, and something in your local rules is filling it. I'd start with the migration. That was a real answer, and I was grateful for it. And I want to be honest that when I hung up the phone, I felt better than I had in 2 days. A migration problem is a thing with a beginning. You can find the row that's wrong and fix the row. So I opened the March cutover logs, which nobody had looked at since March because the cutover had gone, by state standards, well. The way the import worked was this. The vendor took our old inventory file and loaded every site record it found into the new platform. That's the correct thing to do. You don't want to silently drop a site somebody paid for. And the import had a default. Any site record that came across without an explicit closure status was created as active and bookable. Then I went back further into the old system's history and found the row. August 2016. Rel Creek State Park, Hollow Loop, Site 14. Status changed from active to inactive. Changed by D.Truitt. I had used the wrong control. There were 2 ways to take a site out of service in the old system. And I'd used the one meant for a pad that's flooded or has a dead tree over it. A soft flag, temporary, reversible. The kind you set in April and clear in May. The other way was a decommission, which required a packet and a signature and a hazard justification, and which would have written the site off the inventory permanently, and which I did not do. For 9 years, the soft flag had held, because the old system honored soft flags. Then in March, a vendor's import routine looked at a row with no explicit closure status and did exactly what it was designed to do. I sat there in an office with the blinds half down, and I felt something I'm not proud of. Relief. Enormous physical relief. The kind that loosens your shoulders. Because that meant it was me. And a bad flag, and a default setting in somebody's import script. And none of that is a thing that keeps you up at night. That's a Tuesday. I set Site 14 to unavailable in the park's local calendar. Blocked it out through the end of the season, wrote a note in the record, and drove home and made supper and slept 8 hours. The next morning it was active again, and there was a reservation on it for that night, party of 2. And the audit trail said System 3:04 a.m. I want to describe what that does to a person who works with data for a living, because it isn't fear at first. It's insult. I had made a correct change to a correct field, and something had reached in overnight and put it back. I did it again. I blocked it again, harder, with a maintenance flag this time, and an end date in December. I stayed at my desk until 6, making sure the change had committed. I got in at 7 the next morning, and it was active, and there was a stay on it, party of 1, from Coleman. Then I understood, and it wasn't complicated. The reconciliation job pulls master inventory downward. The master lives with the vendor. The park level is a copy. Every local change I made was getting overwritten at 3 in the morning by an authoritative record that said Site 14 was a bookable primitive site at Rell Creek State Park. Because that's what my 2016 flag had told the import to believe. To change the master, you change the site status at the state level. To change a site status at the state level, you submit an inventory change request. I submitted one that afternoon. It came back in 11 minutes. Rejected incomplete. Permanent inventory changes require Form 118, site decommission, including hazard justification, sketch, and signature of the superintendent of records. Sherrod Vance has been superintendent at Rell Creek for going on 9 years. Before that, he was assistant superintendent there, which matters later. I drove out and caught him in the maintenance yard on Monday, standing in front of a mower with the deck off it and a boy from the crew lying underneath. Dana. He didn't look up. Tell me it's about the shower house numbers. It's about a site in Hollow Loop that's taking reservations. 14. He said it flat, no surprise at all, and something in me went very still. Odell told me. He moved a man. He wants a receipt for a free night, which I'm not giving him out of my budget, so you can tell your office it's coming out of yours. I need a 118 on it. Now he looked up. Sherrod's a big man who has spent 30 years outside, and he has a way of taking off his sunglasses to buy himself 3 seconds. A decommission. That's the only way it comes off the master. A 118 needs a hazard. What's the hazard? The site doesn't exist. That's not a hazard. That's an opinion. He said it without heat. A hazard is a slope failure, or a widowmaker, or a septic problem. You put "the site does not exist" in that box, and it comes back to me for correction, and I'm the one who has to correct it. In July, with 104% occupancy on the improved loop, and an audit team coming in October. He wiped his hands on a rag. We are 11 days from the busiest weekend of the year. Block it locally and let it ride. Blocking it locally doesn't hold. It reverts overnight. Then block it every morning. He handed the rag to the boy under the mower. Dana, I've got 2 parks in this state closed since 2019, and a legislature that reads occupancy percentages like a scoreboard. I'm not going to spend the summer on a numbering error. That's the thing I need people to understand about Sherrod. And I'll say it once. He wasn't lying to me, and he wasn't hiding anything from me, not that day. Every word he said was true and reasonable, and the kind of thing a good superintendent says. He was also, I found out later, the only other person alive who knew why the question mattered. I did what he said, after a fashion. The block never held past 3 in the morning, because nothing local did. So what I actually did was get up early and void whatever the job had put on the site overnight, and then block it again for the look of the thing. The stays were always created at 3:04, and the arrivals were always evening, which gave me about 11 hours of margin. For 4 days that worked, in the sense that nobody ever got as far as the pad, and I started to feel like a woman managing a leak with a bucket. On Saturday, I drove out and walked the pad in daylight with Jory, because she'd asked to see it, and because I wanted a second set of eyes on something I was beginning to doubt. In sunlight, it was worse. Mowed close, the grass cut in a rough arc that matched the way you'd swing a walk behind. The gravel apron had been raked at some point in the last few years. You could see where it had been dragged back into a square edge. And when Jory went to the back of the pad and pulled some honeysuckle off a low pipe, there was a spigot. "Is that live?" she said. I told her it couldn't be. The 2016 file said the water line to the upper loop had been cut and capped. She turned it. It coughed, spat rust, and then ran clean and cold into the dirt, and she jumped back like it had bitten her. And then laughed at herself, and I stood there and watched water come out of a pipe that 3 separate documents said wasn't connected to anything. The number plate was still lying face down in the grass where I'd left it. That evening, I went back to the office instead of going home, because a capped line running water is a maintenance record, and maintenance records are the one thing our filing has always been good at. If somebody had reopened that valve, there'd be a work order. There wasn't. What there was, in the old scanned park files under 2016, was a folder labeled Rell Creek Incident, August 2016, and the folder was empty, not missing. Present, indexed, 0 items. The index entry had a cross-reference field, which is a thing our old system used to link a park incident to a reservation record. I copied the string into the archive lookup. It returned 1 reservation. Rell Creek State Park, Hollow Loop, 3-person party, arrival August 19, 2016. Site 22. And under the modification history, 1 line. Site changed from 14 to 22. Changed by D. Truitt. I need to tell this part in order, because the order is the only thing that makes me look like a person instead of a signature. In August 2016, I was a reservations clerk, 35 years old, 4 years into the job, and I did not have an office. I had a chair in a room with 3 other chairs. On a Monday morning, Sherrod Vance called me from Rell Creek, and he was the assistant superintendent then, and I had never spoken to him before that day. He said there was a records issue on a party that had come in the week before. He said the reservation showed a site that wasn't in service, and that this was going to create a problem with the fee report, and that he needed it to show the site they'd actually used. He said it in about the tone you'd use to ask somebody to fix a misspelled last name. I asked him which site they'd actually used, and he said 22. So I changed it. It took 20 minutes, most of which was waiting for the record to unlock. I did not ask why a party would book a closed site, or how the gate had let them do it. I did not ask whether anybody had walked up there. I typed a 2 and a 2 into a field, saved it, and later that week, a request came through to take Site 14 out of service, and I did that too, with the wrong control, in about 90 seconds, at the end of a Friday. Nobody told me anybody was missing. I want to be careful here, nobody told me, and I also did not ask. And I've spent 9 years deciding which of those 2 facts is the one I have to carry. It's the second one. The reservation was in the name of a woman called Delphine Pruitt. The other 2 were her sister and her sister's husband. And I didn't learn that, or a single other thing about any of them, until the end of July this year, from a woman on my office phone. Bet Pruitt had been calling the district twice a year since 2017. I'd seen her name in the routing queue. Public inquiry, historical, refer to central. I'd routed it myself at least once. When she called that Tuesday, I picked it up. "I'm going to say all of it," she said. "And then you can tell me you can't help me, and that's fine. I'm used to that part." Her mother had gone to Rell Creek with her aunt and uncle for 3 nights. They had made the reservation in July over the phone. On the second night, her mother had texted her at 8:52 p.m., and then nothing. And the truck was found in the day-use lot 4 days later. And the state's position, she read it to me from a letter, was that the party had checked out normally on the 22nd, and that the park had no record of any incident. "Site 22, she said. "That's what everything I've ever been given says. 22. I have stood on 22. It's 100 feet from a road with a streetlight on it, and the bathhouse is right there, and there is no way on God's earth that 3 grown people walked off of that pad. Nenet her night. I asked her, and my voice did something on the way out, whether she still had the text message. She had more than that. She had a photograph sent at 8:51, the minute before. She emailed it to me while we were still on the phone. A campfire, low and orange. A camp chair with a woman's knee in it. And behind the chair, out of focus but not out of reach, a 4x4 post with a little rectangular plate on it. Brown with white numerals. And even blurred, you could see that the second numeral had a straight stem and a flag on it, and was not a 2. "Ma'am," Bet said, "are you still there?" I told her I would call her back, and I did not call her back for 11 days, and that's on the list too. I drove out to Rell Creek that night and sat in Odell Rook's awning chair with his generator running and told him what I had. He didn't say anything for a while. He got up, went into the RV, and came back with a card. Not the one out of his shirt pocket, a bigger one and older. It was a manila sight card, the old kind, 5x8, with printed lines and a punch hole in the top corner. And it was soft the way paper gets when it's been handled by many hands over many years. Across the top, somebody had written Rell Creek Hollow, 14 in fountain pen, and under that, 1972. He handed it to me and turned his flashlight on it. There were 2 columns. The left column was long. It ran down the front and continued on the back. And there were tally marks grouped in 5s where somebody had gotten tired of writing. And beside the marks, in a dozen different hands and inks, single words: moved, moved, moved to 9, moved, refused, moved again, sent home, hundreds of them, 53 years of them. The right column had 11 entries, just names and dates. The last 3 were Pruitt, Pruitt, and Ellery, all dated August 20th, 2016. "That's what it costs when you don't get to them," Odell said. I asked him what he meant by getting to them. "You take the paper away." He sat back down. "You go up there, and you tell them there's been a mistake, and you put them somewhere else, and you make sure the tag on their mirror says the new number. Then it's nothing. Then they get up in the morning, and they're mad about the mosquitoes, and they leave. And if you don't, then it goes through." He said it like a man describing a check clearing. 3 in the morning, always 3. Fella that had this before me, Bun, he timed it once with a wristwatch, and he wrote it right there. He tapped the bottom of the card, where somebody had written 3 a.m., not after, and underlined it twice. And I've never known it to be different. Before 3, you can still fix it. After 3, there's nothing on the pad, and the paperwork says they went home. How do you fix it after 3? You don't. That's why there's a line down the middle of the card. I told him about the migration and the default and my flag. He listened to all of it, and at the end of it he said, "So it was off the list for 9 years, and it didn't take anybody in 9 years." I said that was right. "Then don't put it back on the list," he said, which was, at that point, the most useful sentence anybody had said to me. I went back to the office and did the one thing I'm actually good at, which is reading configuration. Every site class in our platform has a set of behaviors, and one of them is what happens to a stay that never gets closed out. In a normal campground, a ranger or a host closes a departure, or the gate does it, or nobody does, and it sits there flagged as an exception until a human resolves it. But there's a setting called auto departure, and if it's on, the overnight job closes any unresolved stay at the checkout hour and posts it as a normal departure. It was on. It has been on, in one form or another, since the state first computerized reservations in the late 90s, because the field crews back then hated exception queues, and somebody with authority made the queue go away. Checkout at Rel Creek is noon. So I ran the query. Every stay site 14 had ever recorded, and how each one closed. And there it was, going back through 5 governors, closed by host, closed by host, closed by gate, closed by host, and then scattered through 9 stays with no human anywhere near them, created by a person, departed by system at 1200. 9 stays, 11 names on the right-hand side of Odell's card, because one of those stays had been a party of 3. Nobody had ever checked out of Site 14 and disappeared. That's the part I couldn't put down. There was never an unexplained absence, never an open item, never a report that didn't balance. The books had been closing themselves for 50 years, and they had been closing themselves cleanly. And that is precisely why no investigation had ever started. If Delphine Pruitt's record had sat in an exception queue for 4 days, somebody would have walked up that road on the 21st with a flashlight. Instead, a batch job wrote departed, 12 noon, and the state told her daughter to go home. I had the mechanism, I had the card, I had a photograph, and I had nothing an institution accepts. I've thought about how to say the next part without dressing it up. A manila card in a volunteer's shirt pocket is not evidence. A blurry photo is a family's grief. My own 2016 edit made me the least credible witness in the state. What I needed was one incident with a timestamp on it, inside the state's own system, that no one could call a rumor. I needed the thing to happen while I was watching it happen, in a record I hadn't touched. On the 4th of August, I left it alone. I told myself I'd get a name and then void it with hours to spare. And that the record itself, created by system, voided by me, with the site's history behind it, would be enough to make somebody at Central pick up a phone. That was a real plan for about 9 hours. The name that came up at 3:04 that morning was Marvin Cadle, party of 1, Fort Payne. Not the man from before, a different man from the same town, which I've never been able to make mean anything. He checked in at 6:40 that evening. Odell's cell was off. His daughter had a thing in Albertville, and he'd told me 2 days earlier he'd be gone overnight. And I had heard him say it, and I had let the site come open anyway. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop, and the record on the screen, and my finger on the trackpad. If I voided it, I had a canceled reservation, which is the most ordinary object in my entire profession. Nothing. Noise. Sherrod would have said good, block it in the morning, and the audit would come in October, and Bet Pruitt would get another letter. If I let it stand, I would have a stay created by a machine on a site that does not exist, and a departure posted by a machine at noon, and a man's family calling a number, and it would be undeniable. I understood exactly what I was choosing. I want that understood. I have read enough of my own words since to know that this is the place where people stop being able to follow me, and I don't ask them to. At 11, I drove to Rel Creek. I told myself I was going to move him. Jory was off. The gate was on self-serve. I got up to the bend at Hollow Loop a little before midnight, and I could see the shape of a small tent on the pad and a light inside it, the yellow kind, somebody reading. I sat in my car on the gravel with the engine off for a long time. There's no version of this where I come out of it well. If I woke him and moved him, I'd have gone back to holding a bucket under a leak with Sherrod telling me to stop wasting hours. And eventually I'd have missed a night, and it would have been someone else. That's the argument I made in the car. It's a real argument. It's also the argument of a woman who had already decided. At 1:15, I started the engine and drove home. I stayed up. At 3 o'clock, the reconciliation kicked off, and my screen didn't change, because screens don't. At 3:41, the job finished. At noon the next day, the record posted departed system, 12 o'clock. And the stay showed complete, and there was no fee attached because there was no fee code, and the variance report flagged it exactly the way it had flagged the first one. Marvin Cattle's sister filed with the sheriff's office in DeKalb County on the 9th. I drove out that evening with the card in an envelope on my passenger seat, because Odell had given it to me to copy, and I hadn't given it back. He was sitting under his awning. He didn't ask where I'd been on the 5th. I think he knew before I got out of the car. He handed me the pencil out of his shirt pocket, a carpenter's pencil worn down to about 3 inches. And he waited while I found the right column and wrote the name and the date on the 12th line. "You had it come open on purpose," he said. I said yes. He looked out at the loop road for a while. Then he said, "Bun done that once too, in '81. He wanted somebody to believe him." "Did they?" "They believed him fine," Odell said. "They wrote it up. They wrote it up as a man who left without paying. The thing about a state system is that it will let you do quietly what it forbids you to do officially. I couldn't remove Site 14 from the master, but I could put a reservation on it. Anybody with my rights could. So starting on the 11th of August, I began booking it myself, a maintenance hold, in my own name, keyed a day ahead so that when the job ran at 3 in the morning, the coming night was already spoken for. A hold is a stay, and the overnight job has no permission to touch a stay. The site could come back active at 3:04 all it wanted. It came back active and found itself occupied. D. Truitt, party of 1, purpose, maintenance, no fee. It worked. I want to be plain about that, because it's the only stretch of this where I did something and the something held. For 12 days, nothing arrived on that pad. Odell slept through the night. I got up at 6, made coffee, keyed the hold from my kitchen, and drove to work like a woman with a manageable problem. On the 23rd, my holds were gone, and there was a family of 6 on the site for that night. Sherrod's door was open when I got out to the park at 4. He had my hold records printed out, which told me somebody in Montgomery had noticed before he did, and that he'd been asked about it, and that he had answered without knowing what he was answering for. "Sit down." I sat. 12 nights, he said. Peak season, a site blocked with no work order behind it, entered by a district revenue employee under her own name, which is Dana. Do you understand what that looks like from a desk in Montgomery? It looks like an employee holding inventory. It's a closed site. There's no revenue. It's still an active site, with an unbuilt rate. Central caught it because your holds created 12 $0 nights against a primitive class, and the primitive class at Relk Creek runs about $43, and they ran the delta. He turned the paper around so I could see the number circled in pen. $516. That's the arithmetic on my desk. $516 of blocked peak season inventory. That's what this is, on paper. There's a man from Fort Payne who... I know about the man from Fort Payne. He said it quietly and it stopped me. The sheriff's office called me on the 10th. I told them what our records say, because that's what I'm required to tell them. And our records say he departed at noon. And Dana, I want you to hear me. I've been at this park 11 years, and I have never once had a body, or a search, or a reporter, or a wrongful death claim, or a family standing in my parking lot. Not once. That is not because I'm a good administrator. He put the sunglasses on the desk between us. He looked older than he had in the maintenance yard. In 2016, I called you about a records issue, he said. You were 4 years in. I picked the newest name on the list on purpose. I'm not going to sit here and tell you I did right." He stopped, started again. "Odell came to me that morning and told me they were gone and told me what the card said. And I stood on that pad in daylight, and I looked at 3 tents and a cooler with food in it and a truck in the day lot. And I made a decision that it would be worse for everybody if the state went looking. I've had 9 years to find a better reason than that, and I don't have one." "Then sign the 118. "On what hazard?" "On the true one." I write the true one, and it goes to Central, and Central sends engineering, and engineering finds a level pad with a live water spigot and no slope failure, and they send it back to me marked "No deficiency found." And now there's a paper trail asking why the superintendent tried to close a serviceable site. And I get put on leave, and the site stays open, and the man who's been keeping people off it is a 71-year-old volunteer with no standing. He shook his head slowly. "I've thought about this longer than you have. There is no form for this. Then I'll block it every morning, and you'll cover it. I can't cover $500 a month of nothing in an audit year." He said it like it hurt him, and I believe it did. Occupancy is how they decide which parks live. Fort Payne is a real thing, and it's on me, and I still can't do it. I said, "There's a family of 6 on it tonight." He said, "Then go move them." So I did, and that was the night I learned that the moving is the hard part. They were from Trussville. 2 adults, 4 kids. And by the time I got up the loop at 8:45, they had a dome tent staked, a screen shelter with the poles in, a fire going, and a boy of about 7 asleep in a camp chair. I came up in a state vehicle with a state IID on a lanyard, and I still stood there for 10 minutes, making no progress at all. The husband was polite and immovable. "We paid for a site. This is the site. Numbers on the post." I looked, and it was. The plate was on the post, both bolts through, level. I had left it face down in the grass 11 days earlier, and there was nobody up in that loop but Odell. And Odell had a bad shoulder and hadn't been past 12 in a week because he'd told me so. I said the site was closed for maintenance, and I could put them on 19, which is better, which has electric. And the wife said that was fine, and the husband said, "We're not breaking down camp at 9 o'clock at night for a computer error." And he was right. That's exactly what it was. And I had no authority to make him do anything at all. What worked was paper. I went back down to the gatehouse, keyed the change on the terminal, and printed a new permit tag, the little perforated card that hangs on a mirror, with the site number in 1/2-inch type. I carried it up the hill and put it in his hand. He read it. He looked at the post. He looked at the tag again. And then he turned around and said, "Ashley, we're on 19. And inside of 20 minutes, they had the tent down and the truck loaded. And the boy never woke up. That's the whole mechanism right there. And it took me until that night to see it. Nobody is compelled. Nobody is lured. People go where the paperwork says, and they stay where the paperwork says. And they leave when the paperwork changes. And the only thing that Pad ever needed from the state of Alabama was a number on a piece of paper. My suspension came through the next afternoon. Administrative leave, pending review. Misuse of reservation privileges and unauthorized inventory holds. My laptop was collected at 4 o'clock. My credentials were disabled while I was still in the parking lot, which I know because I tried them on my phone. 2 days after that, Bet Pruitt filed a public records request. She'd been asking politely for 9 years, and this time she asked in writing, under the Alabama Open Records Act. And she asked for a specific thing: all reservation records, modification histories, and site assignments for her mother's party. Not a summary. The record and its history. Alabama's law gives a public officer a reasonable time to respond. And our division's internal standard is 15 business days. And Central's records officer takes that standard seriously because the alternative is a lawsuit. Which meant that in about 3 weeks, the state would hand a grieving woman a document showing that her mother's site assignment had been changed from 14 to 22 by an employee named Truitt, and that the same employee had certified the occupancy reports containing it in 2016 and again, by extension, every year since. I could have let that be my problem alone. I want to say that clearly, because the next thing I did was the first decision in this entire story I'd make the same way twice. I spent a weekend building the packet I should have built in July. Not the version that would pass the version that was true. Site history from 1972 to the present. Taken from the archive before my access died. With the 910 machine closed departures broken out on their own page. The auto departure configuration line printed with the checkout hours circled. A scan of both sides of Odell's card, front and back, with the tally marks and Bunn's underlined note. Bet's photograph at full resolution, next to a photograph I'd taken of the post with the plate on it, and a 2-page memo in plain English with my own name. In the second paragraph, describing what I changed in 2016 and why, and what I did on the 4th of August, and what happened at 3 in the morning on the 5th. I submitted it Monday as a Form 118 with hazard justification. It came back Wednesday. Rejected incomplete. Requires signature of the superintendent of record. Same 11-minute rejection. Same field. There was no other door. There has never been any other door. The master inventory changes when a superintendent signs, and it does not change otherwise. And I no longer had a login to even be told no with. So on Wednesday evening, I emailed the entire packet to the division's records officer in Montgomery as a supplemental disclosure attached to Bet Pruitt's pending request, and I copied Bet. And I copied the district director, and in the body I wrote that I was the employee who altered the 2016 record, that I was making the disclosure voluntarily, and that I understood the consequences. Then I called Bet and told her what was in it before she opened it, because she should not have found her mother's name on a line in a spreadsheet from a stranger. She was quiet for a long time. Then she asked me what the tally marks meant. I told her the left column was everybody a host had gotten to in time. She said, "So it's mostly the left column." I said it was overwhelmingly the left column. 53 years of it. "Okay," she said. Her voice was thick. "Okay. Then somebody's been doing it right for 50 years, and my mother got the 1 week nobody was there." Odell had been in Albertville the night of the 20th in 2016, at his daughter's, the same as the 4th of August. I hadn't put that together until she said it, and I didn't tell her, and I've never told him I noticed. Thursday morning, Jory called me at home. She wasn't supposed to. I was on leave, and she knew it. "Ms. Truitt, my name's on it." I asked her to slow down. Hollow 14. Tonight. It came up on the arrival list this morning, with my name on it and my tag number. And it's got me as party of 1. A shake in her voice, she was working hard to keep out of it. "I don't camp. I live in Grant. I've got a room at my mama's house." I asked her who else knew. I showed Mr. Cordray, assistant super, newer than me. He moved me to the volunteer pad, and he said it was a training record thing from when they set up my employee profile. He was real nice about it. He doesn't know, does he? I told her he didn't, and I told her not to explain it to him. and I told her that being moved was the entire point, and that she was fine. She was fine. Cordray voided the record at 9 in the morning without knowing what he'd done, the way a man kicks a rock off a highway. But she was staff. She wasn't a guest. She'd never booked anything. She was a 19-year-old with an employee profile in the same database, which meant the site wasn't drawing from the reservation pool. It was drawing from everyone in the system. I called Odell that afternoon to tell him. He already knew, because Jory had told him at the gate. "Girl was shook up," he said. I told him what I'd sent to Montgomery and who had it. I told him the record's deadline. I told him that with Bet in the loop and my own confession in the file, somebody would have to answer it in writing. And that a written answer meant a real review. And that a real review meant the site would finally come off the master in 3 weeks, maybe 4. I said we had to hold the line until then. I said I'd get Cordray on the phone and teach him to key the hold every morning, and I'd teach Jory, and we'd run a schedule. Odell let me finish. Then he said, "I've been up here since '86, off and on." I said I knew. Bunn had it before me and Wicks before him, and there's names on that card I never met. A long pause, and the sound of his awning chair taking his weight. "I keyed it myself this evening, Dana. On the terminal with my host pin. It's got me on 14 for tonight." I stood up out of my chair. I remember the sound my kitchen stool made on the floor. "Take it off." "It'll take a name," he said. "Might as well be an old one." I was on the county road by 7 and at the gate a little after 8. Jory let me through. She wasn't scheduled, she'd stayed past her shift, and she was sitting in the gatehouse with the light off. And when I pulled up, she said, "He won't answer me." And I told her to stay where she was and keep the terminal on. Odell was on the pad with a lantern and a folding chair and a thermos, sitting where you'd sit if you were waiting on somebody. The plate was on the post. Both bolts. His truck keys were on the picnic table with the permit tag beside them. The little perforated card, half-inch type, Site 14. I tried talking first. I sat on the end of the table, and I talked to that man for 2 hours. He wasn't despairing. I've thought about that a great deal, and it's the part I'd want anybody to know. He was 71. He had a shoulder that didn't work, and a truck that didn't start half the time. He lived rent-free on a host pad because his daughter's spare room had a boy in it now, and he had spent 39 years walking up a gravel road at night to take pieces of paper out of strangers' hands. He'd done the arithmetic I hadn't wanted to do. 3 weeks of holds, keyed by people who didn't believe in it. At 7 in the morning, every morning. With him gone one night to Albertville and Jory back at school in September and Cordray transferring in the spring. "It takes one," he said. "It's been taking one about every 5 years since before you were born. And it don't take 2. And if it's got me, it ain't got the next one." I told him the review would close it. "You said 3 weeks. You said that like it was short." At 10:30, I tried to carry him, which is a ridiculous sentence about a woman my size and a man built out of rebar, and he stood up and let me get my arms around him, and then just set his heels and waited until I quit. Then he sat back down. He wasn't cruel about it. He poured me coffee out of the thermos afterward. And it wouldn't have mattered. That's the thing I already knew and tried, anyway. It's never been about where the body is. It's about what the record says. So I went at the record, and I lost every door in order. Guessed self-cancel first from my phone off the confirmation number Jory read me over the radio. The link loaded and the button was there, and when I pressed it, the page returned an error, because canceling a stay triggers a refund calculation. And there was no fee code on the site. and the routine had nothing to divide. 9 years of that blank field. And it locked the only door a person could open alone. Gate terminal next. I drove down, and Jory brought up the record, and the terminal asked for authorization to void a host-entered reservation. And the authorization it wanted was the host's PIN. And the host was sitting on the pad at the top of the loop. I called Cordray. Voicemail, then his wife. Then Cordray, who was in Cullman at his mother's, 4 hours round trip, and who listened to about 40 seconds before he said, "Dana, you're on leave. I'm not touching a record you're calling me about." And he was correct, and I have never held it against him. My own credentials were dead. I tried them anyway, twice. That left one name. I called Sherrod Vance at 1 in the morning. He picked up on the 4th ring with his voice full of sleep, and I told him where I was and who was on the pad and what time it was. He said, "Get him off it." I said I couldn't, and I explained about the self-cancel and the pin and Cordray, and I heard him sit up, and I heard a lamp click. "Dana, I can't void a reservation for my kitchen at 1 in the morning. You can. You've got superintendent rights on the park, and the same panel that takes a 118 takes an emergency site closure with your signature. And I submitted it Monday as a Form 118 with hazard justification. On paper, hand-carried to the district office, because my login had been dead for a week. It came back Wednesday. Rejected incomplete. Requires signature of the superintendent of record. Same rejection, same field. It had only taken 2 days this time instead of 11 minutes. You told me that yourself in the maintenance yard, except you said it as a reason not to do it. An emergency closure requires a hazard. Then you write down the hazard. He said nothing. Sherrod. At 3 o'clock that job runs and it locks yesterday, and at noon tomorrow the system posts him departed, and it'll balance, and there won't be an exception, and nobody will ever look. That's what it does. That's the whole trick. It's not that it takes people. It's that the paperwork's clean afterward, and it's clean because we made it clean, you and me, in 2016. That file is 9 years. It's not 9 years old anymore. It went to the records officer Wednesday night with my name in it. Bet Pruitt has it. The district director has it. There's a photograph in it, Sherrod. Her mother took it at 8:51 on the 20th of August, and there's a post in the background with a plate on it, and the number is not 22. I could hear him breathing. You've got until 3 either way, I said. That part's not mine to give you. The quiet went on so long, I checked the screen to see if the call had dropped. Then he said, "What's the number on the plate in the picture?" I told him you could see the stem and the flag on the 4 even blurred, that you could see it plain, and that a records officer with a magnifier would see it in about 4 seconds. "All right," he said. I stayed on the line while he found his laptop. I heard a chair and a dog somewhere in his house, and his wife's voice asking something and him answering low. It took him 19 minutes to get into the panel because he hadn't used it since a bathhouse closure in the spring, and his password had expired, and he had to reset it. And I stood in the gravel by the gatehouse, listening to a man type. At 2:47 he said, "It's in." Jory was watching the terminal. She said, "It's syncing." And then a few seconds later, "It's the site's gone gray. It says closed. The line's blank." I drove up the loop with my window down. Odell had the lantern turned low. He looked up when the headlights came around the bend, and I got out and walked over and said, "It's voided. Your tag's no good." He sat there another second. Then he picked up the permit card off the picnic table and held it out into the lantern light. and looked at it the way he'd looked at 1,000 of them. The way you check a number against a post before you tell somebody that they're in the wrong place. Then he folded the chair. He carried it down the road himself with the thermos hooked in 2 fingers, and I walked beside him, and neither of us said anything. And at 3 a.m., we were standing at the bottom of the loop by his RV with the awning light on. And at 3:41, Jory called up from the gatehouse to tell me the job had closed, with no exceptions. When I went back up in the morning for his keys, the plate was face down in the grass. Nobody hung it back up. I've asked. Jory didn't. Cordray didn't. Odell's shoulder wouldn't have let him. It has been face down since, and then it wasn't anywhere, because in October they brought a dozer up the hill. The rest is short, and none of it is strange. I was terminated on the 5th of September for unauthorized inventory holds, misuse of credentials, and falsification of a park record in August 2016. The district attorney's office in Marshall County looked at the falsification for about 6 weeks and declined, on the grounds that I'd disclosed it myself and there was no evidence of personal gain, which is true and which did not make me feel any particular way. I was 19 years and 2 months in, counting the 6 years at Revenue before I ever saw a campground. 25 would have let me draw at any age. 19 means you wait until 60 and take it reduced, and I couldn't wait. So I withdrew my contributions instead, which ends the whole thing for good, and it went where money goes. My mother's memory care place in Guntersville was $400 more a month than I could carry without the job. She's in a smaller one now in Boaz, 40 minutes farther out. The staff there are kind, and there are fewer of them. The division's response to Bet's request went out in October, and it was, to their credit, complete. It included the modification history. It included a corrected record. Somebody at Central had to sit down and write a sentence stating that on the night of August 20th, 2016, 3 people were on Hollow Loop Site 14 at Rell Creek State Park, and that the state's prior statements were in error. And somebody did write it, and I don't know who. The park closed the upper end of Hollow Loop that fall. The memo I wrote never made it anywhere. What got filed was a regrading project for drainage, which is technically true, because they did regrade it, and materially incomplete, because that isn't why. Site 14 came off the master inventory as part of the project. Off the master, off the copy, off the import list, off everything. I checked from a public terminal at the library in November, the way you'd press on a tooth. Sherrod kept his job. There was a letter in his file about the 2016 incident and no discipline beyond it, and I understand the reasoning, and I'd probably have reached the same reasoning from that desk. He has never called me. I don't need him to. He typed for 19 minutes at 2 in the morning, with his career sitting on the table in front of him. And whatever else the man is, he did that. I met Bet Pruitt once in a parking lot outside a Cracker Barrel off 431 because that's where the road put us. She wanted to know which end of the lake. That's what 9 years came down to. For her, she'd been standing on the wrong pad, down by the streetlight. All that time. I told her the upper loop, the bend under the hardwoods, 30 feet back from the road. She wrote it on the back of an envelope. Then she asked if it was a nice spot, and I said it was the nicest one up there, which is true, and which is probably the reason for all of it, and which is the closest thing to an explanation anybody is ever going to get. Odell moved in with his daughter in Albertville. His shoulder got worse, and then he had it done, and he's all right. In December, an envelope came to my house with no note in it, just the manila card, soft as cloth. Rell Creek Hollow, 1972, across the top in fountain pen. 12 names in the right-hand column. 53 years of tally marks in the left. I work nights now at a 60-room motel out on the interstate. The desk from 11 to 7. It's honest and it's quiet. And the property management system is a cheap one. And at 3 in the morning, it runs its close and prints the day's occupancy on a little thermal roll. I take the printout and I walk the outside corridor with it, both floors, and I count the cars against the names. I already have the names. The paper is right. I check anyway.